William had been working at the palace for 3 years, but he had never been assigned to the restricted wing. The old stone corridors echoed with his footsteps as he carried the heavy brass key that the head butler had given him just an hour ago. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold morning air that drifted through the ancient windows, but from nervous anticipation. The young servant had always been curious about what lay behind the mysterious oak door at the end of the east corridor. Other servants whispered about it in hushed tones during their evening meals. Some said it was a treasure room filled with gold and jewels from conquered kingdoms. Others believed it held the royal family's darkest secrets. The older staff members would simply shake their heads and change the subject whenever anyone asked direct questions. William approached the door slowly, his leather shoes making soft sounds against the polished marble floor. The corridor seemed unusually quiet today. Normally, royal guards would be stationed at various points, but this morning, they had been mysteriously reassigned to other duties. Only 2 guards remained, standing rigid at attention on either side of the forbidden entrance. Guard. Captain Marcus, a stern man with graying hair and countless battle scars, had specifically requested William for this task. The captain had pulled him aside after the morning briefing and spoken in a voice so low that William had to lean forward to hear every word. The instructions were simple, yet strange. Unlock the door, enter alone, and report back immediately. With whatever he discovered inside as William drew closer, he noticed something peculiar about the guards' behavior. Instead of their usual confident posture, both men seemed uncomfortable. Their eyes darted nervously, and sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the cool morning temperature. When William made eye contact with the younger guard, the man quickly looked away, his face flushing red with what appeared to be shame or embarrassment. The door itself was magnificent yet ominous. Carved from dark oak and reinforced with iron bands, it stood nearly 10 feet tall. Intricate designs covered its surface, depicting scenes that William couldn't quite understand. Some carvings showed figures in royal robes, while others displayed strange symbols that seemed to shift and change when he looked at them from different angles. William inserted the brass key into the elaborate lock. The mechanism was old but well maintained, turning smoothly with a satisfying click that echoed through the corridor. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the ornate door handle. Something about this situation felt wrong, but he couldn't identify exactly what was troubling him. Behind him, he heard one of the guards clear his throat nervously. When William glanced back, both men were staring at the floor, their faces pale and drawn. The younger guard's hands were shaking so badly that his sword rattled softly in its scabbard. This reaction only intensified William's growing sense of unease. The door handle felt surprisingly warm under his palm, almost as if the metal had been heated by some internal source. William pressed down slowly, hearing the ancient hinges begin to creak in protest. The sound seemed to fill the entire corridor, growing louder and more pronounced as the door gradually swung inward. A strange smell drifted out through the opening. Gap. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was unlike anything William had ever encountered before. The scent reminded him of flowers, but not any flowers that grew in the palace gardens. There was something exotic and otherworldly about it, mixed with hints of expensive perfume and something else he couldn't identify. Light began to filter through the widening opening, but it wasn't the natural sunlight that illuminated the rest of the palace. This light had a golden quality, soft and warm like candlelight, yet brighter and more consistent. William could hear faint sounds coming from within the room, but they were muffled and indistinct. His curiosity overcame his caution as he pushed the door open wider. The hinges continued their protest, creating an eerie soundtrack to his discovery. The guards behind him had gone completely silent, and William could sense their growing tension without even looking back at them. As more of the room became visible, William's breath caught in his throat. What he saw defied all his expectations and challenged everything he thought he knew about the royal palace. The chamber beyond the door was not a storage room or treasure vault, but something far more extraordinary and disturbing. The walls were covered in rich tapestries that seemed to move and shimmer in the strange golden light. Expensive furniture filled the space, but it was arranged in ways that suggested purposes William couldn't immediately understand. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow patterns across surfaces that gleamed with precious metals and gems. But it wasn't the luxury that made William's heart race and his palms grow sweaty. It was the occupants of the room who caused his world to shift on its axis. What he discovered behind that door would change not only his understanding of the royal family, but his entire perception of the kingdom he had served so faithfully. The sounds he had heard from the corridor became clearer now. They were voices, speaking in languages he didn't recognize, mixed with other sounds that made his cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. William realized he was witnessing something that no ordinary servant was ever meant to see. As he stood frozen in the doorway trying to process what lay before him, he became aware that the guards behind him had moved. When he finally turned to look back at them, both men had lowered their eyes to the ground, their faces red with shame and their bodies trembling with some mixture of fear and disgust. William understood then that he was not the first person to open this door. The guards knew exactly what lay beyond the threshold, and their reaction told him everything he needed to know about how he was supposed to respond to this revelation. The weight of this secret, whatever it was, had been crushing these loyal soldiers, and now it was about to become his burden as well. The brass key felt heavy in his other hand, as he realized there was no going back from this moment. Whatever he discovered in the next few minutes would change his life forever, and perhaps determine whether he would live to see another sunrise. William stepped fully into the chamber, his eyes adjusting to the strange golden light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The room was far larger than he had expected, extending deep into the palace's foundation. Columns supported a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes that made his stomach turn. The artwork depicted figures engaged in activities that no decent person should witness, let alone create in such vivid detail. The voices he had heard became clearer as he moved deeper into the room. They came from behind an ornate screen made of silk and gold thread, decorated with more disturbing images. William's feet moved forward almost against his will, drawn by a combination of horror and fascination that he couldn't control. Each step took him further from the safety of ignorance and deeper into a truth that would haunt him forever. As he approached the screen, the conversations became more distinct. He recognized one voice immediately, and his blood turned to ice in his veins. It was Prince Edward, the king's eldest son and heir to the throne. The prince was speaking in hushed, intimate tones to someone William couldn't see. But it wasn't the content of their conversation that shocked William most. It was the realization of who the prince was talking to. The second voice belonged to Lady Catherine, the Duke of Westmoreland's wife. William had served at many royal banquets where both the prince and Lady Catherine had been present with their respective spouses. He had watched them exchange polite greetings and formal pleasantries, never imagining that behind the facade of court etiquette lay this secret relationship. But as William listened more carefully, he realized the situation was even more complicated than a simple affair between two members of the nobility. There were other voices in the room, both male and female, speaking in the same intimate tones. The golden light cast shadows on the screen, and those shadows revealed silhouettes that made William's face burn with shame and understanding. He heard the rustle of expensive fabrics being removed, the clink of jewelry being carelessly tossed, a sigh and soft laughter that carried an edge of something dark and forbidden. The scents in the room grew stronger, mixing perfumes from different kingdoms with other odors that made William realize exactly what kind of activities took place in this hidden chamber. A new voice joined the conversation, and William's knees nearly buckled when he recognized it. Queen Isabella herself was present in this room, participating in whatever was happening behind the ornate screen. The woman who appeared in public as the perfect example of royal dignity and moral authority was here, in this secret place, engaging in behavior that would destroy the monarchy if it ever became public knowledge. William backed away from the screen, his mind reeling from the implications of what he was discovering. The royal family that he had served with such loyalty and respect was living a double life that mocked everything they claimed to represent. The morning prayers in the royal chapel, the public displays of piety and virtue, the stern moral pronouncements issued to the common people, all of it was a lie designed to hide this corruption. As he retreated toward the door, William's foot knocked against something on the floor. Looking down, he saw a collection of personal items scattered across the expensive carpet. There were rings bearing the seals of noble houses, jewelry that belonged to wives of prominent court officials, and clothing that he recognized from recent royal ceremonies. The evidence of multiple participants in these activities was overwhelming and undeniable. The full scope of the scandal began to dawn on William as he surveyed the room more carefully. This wasn't just about one or two people having an affair. This was an organized gathering of the kingdom's most powerful individuals, all participating in activities that would be considered criminal if done by common citizens. The hypocrisy was staggering and nauseating. Near an elegant writing desk, William noticed stacks of documents tied with silk ribbons. His curiosity overcame his revulsion as he approached to examine them more closely. The papers appeared to be correspondence between various noble houses, but the content was unlike any diplomatic communication he had ever seen. These letters contained explicit arrangements, schedules for meetings, and agreements about participation in activities that had nothing to do with governing the kingdom. Some of the documents bore the royal seal, meaning they had been written with the full authority of the crown. William realized that the secret activities in this room were not just personal indulgences, but were somehow connected to the political machinery of the kingdom. Favors were being exchanged, alliances were being formed, and decisions affecting thousands of citizens were being made in this chamber of corruption. The golden light in the room seemed to pulse and flicker as William continued his exploration. He discovered that the illumination came from an intricate network of mirrors and crystals that captured and concentrated natural light from hidden openings in the walls. The entire chamber had been designed with incredible attention to detail, suggesting that these activities had been going on for years, possibly decades. Behind the screen, the conversations had grown quieter, but more intense. William heard his own name mentioned, and his blood froze as he realized they knew he was in the room. Prince Edward's voice carried clearly as he discussed what should be done about the servant with the key. The tone was casual, as if they were discussing the weather rather than potentially ordering William's death. William understood then that Captain Marcus had not chosen him randomly for this task. Someone had specifically wanted him to discover this secret, but he couldn't understand why. Was this a test of his loyalty? A trap designed to eliminate him? Or was someone trying to use him to expose the corruption that festered at the heart of the kingdom? The voices behind the screen grew louder as footsteps approached. William realized that his time for observation was ending, and soon he would have to face the people whose secrets he had uncovered. His mind raced as he tried to decide how to react when they emerged from behind their concealment. Should he pretend ignorance and claim he had seen nothing? Should he express outrage and moral indignation? Or should he simply wait to see how they intended to handle his inconvenient knowledge? Each option carried deadly risks, and William realized that his next few words and actions would determine whether he lived to see another day. The ornate screen began to move as someone prepared to step out from behind it. William straightened his shoulders and tried to compose his face into an expression of neutral professionalism. Even though his heart was pounding so hard, he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for William, but potentially for the entire kingdom. Prince Edward emerged from behind the screen wearing only a silk robe that hung loosely around his shoulders. His dark hair was disheveled, and his face carried the flushed look of someone who had been drinking expensive wine. When his eyes met William's, there was no surprise, no embarrassment, and no shame. Instead, the prince smiled with a confidence that chilled William to the bone. "Ah, young William," the prince said, his voice carrying the same casual tone he might use when greeting a servant in the hallway. "Right on time, I see. Captain Marcus assured me you would be prompt and thorough in your duties." The prince moved closer, and William caught the scent of foreign perfumes and something else that made his stomach turn. Behind the prince, other figures began to emerge from their concealment. Queen Isabella appeared next, wearing an elaborate gown that had clearly been hastily put back on. Her jewelry was askew, and her usually perfect hair showed signs of recent activity. She looked at William with calculating eyes, studying his reaction as if she were evaluating a piece of merchandise. Lady Catherine followed, along with two men William recognized as prominent court officials. Lord Blackwood, the kingdom's treasurer, and Sir Aldrich, the head of the royal council, both appeared disheveled and uncomfortable now that their activities had been interrupted. The casual way they acknowledged William's presence made it clear that this was not the first time a servant had stumbled upon their secret gatherings. "You seem surprised, William," Queen Isabella said, her voice carrying the same regal authority she used during public ceremonies. "Did you truly believe that people in our position would live according to the same constraints that govern ordinary citizens? We make the laws, child. We are not bound by them in the same way others are." Prince Edward picked up a golden goblet from a nearby table and took a long drink before continuing the conversation. "Your loyalty to our family has been noted and appreciated, William. That is precisely why you were chosen for this particular task. We need someone we can trust completely, someone who understands that discretion is more valuable than gold." William found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your Highness, I don't understand what you expect from me. I was simply told to unlock the door and report what I found." His hands trembled as he spoke, and he struggled to maintain eye contact with the powerful people surrounding him. Lord Blackwood laughed, a sound that had no warmth or humor in it. "Report to whom, boy?" Captain Marcus answers directly to the prince. "The guards outside that door have been carefully selected for their absolute loyalty and their understanding of the consequences of betraying royal confidence. There is no one for you to report to except us." The full scope of William's situation became clear as the adults in the room exchanged knowing glances. He had not been chosen randomly or accidentally. This was a carefully orchestrated recruitment, designed to bring him into their circle of corruption. The trust he had felt when Captain Marcus selected him had been naive and misplaced. Sir Aldrich approached William with a document in his hand. "This is a pledge of absolute discretion and loyalty," he explained, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Your signature will formalize your understanding that what you have witnessed here today never happened. In exchange, you will be richly rewarded and given opportunities for advancement that would otherwise be impossible for someone of your background." William stared at the document without taking it. The writing was in formal legal language that he couldn't fully understand, but the implications were clear. He was being asked to become complicit in the corruption he had witnessed, to trade his integrity for wealth and position. The offer was tempting, but something deep inside him rebelled against the idea. "What if I refuse?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The smile faded from Prince Edward's face, replaced by an expression of cold calculation that reminded William that this man would someday rule the entire kingdom. "Refusal is not really an option," the prince said quietly. "You see, William, you now possess information that could destroy not just individuals, but the stability of the entire realm. The common people are not ready for the truth about how power really works. They need their illusions of moral authority and righteous leadership. Without those illusions, chaos would follow." Queen Isabella moved closer to William, her presence both comforting and threatening at the same time. "Consider what would happen if word of today's discoveries reached the wrong ears," she said softly. "Religious leaders would call for revolution. Foreign kingdoms would see weakness and opportunity. The carefully maintained balance that keeps our people fed and protected would crumble." William realized that they were not just threatening him personally. They were suggesting that his moral objections could lead to widespread suffering and destruction. The weight of this responsibility pressed down on him as he tried to think clearly about his options. Lady Catherine spoke for the first time since emerging from behind the screen. "We are not asking you to participate in anything, William. We are simply asking you to understand that sometimes preserving the greater good requires accepting uncomfortable truths. The kingdom is stronger when its leaders can pursue their personal interests without the burden of public scrutiny." The logic was seductive and terrifying at the same time. William could see how easily he might convince himself that silence was the noble choice, that protecting the stability of the realm justified overlooking the corruption of its leaders. But he could also see how this reasoning had allowed the situation to develop in the first place. The room fell silent as William struggled with his decision. The golden light continued to pulse gently, casting shifting shadows on the faces of the people who held his fate in their hands. He could smell the lingering sense of their activities, hear the distant sounds of the normal palace routine continuing outside this chamber of secrets. Prince Edward set down his goblet and moved to stand directly in front of William. "Time is a luxury we do not have," he said firmly. "The guards outside know you entered this room. They know what you have seen. Your decision affects not just your own future, but theirs as well. Their families depend on their positions and their discretion." William felt the walls closing in around him as he realized how many people were connected to this web of secrecy. The guards, their families, the servants who maintained this chamber, the officials who arranged these gatherings, all of them were bound together by shared knowledge and mutual dependence. The document in Sir Aldrich's hand seemed to grow heavier as William stared at it. His signature would not just bind him to silence, it would make him a part of the system that he found so repugnant. But refusal would likely mean death, not just for himself, but potentially for others who had been unfortunate enough to learn these secrets. As William reached for the document, his hand shaking with the magnitude of the decision he was about to make, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Someone was approaching the door, and the sound carried an urgency that suggested this encounter was about to take an unexpected turn. The footsteps in the corridor stopped directly outside the door, followed by the sound of urgent whispering between multiple voices. Prince Edward's confident expression faltered for the first time since William had entered the chamber. The prince held up his hand for silence while straining to identify the voices beyond the oak barrier. A sharp knock echoed through the room, followed by a voice that made everyone present freeze in terror. "Open this door immediately by order of King Henry himself." It was Sir Geoffrey, the king's personal guard and most trusted advisor. His presence here meant that their secret gathering had been discovered by the one person in the kingdom who could not be bought, threatened, or reasoned with. Queen Isabella's face went white as she realized what this meant. If the king had sent Sir Geoffrey, then someone had betrayed their activities to the one authority they could not circumvent. The careful network of loyalty and silence that had protected their secret for years had finally been broken by someone with access to the king's ear. Prince Edward moved quickly to the door, his mind racing as he tried to formulate an explanation that might minimize the damage. But William could see the panic in the prince's eyes, and he realized that no explanation would be sufficient for what the king's representative would find in this chamber. "Your Majesty," Prince Edward called through the door, trying to buy time, while the others in the room scrambled to make themselves presentable. "We were just conducting some private business. Perhaps we could arrange a more convenient time for this discussion." Sir Geoffrey's response was immediate and uncompromising. "The king is aware of the nature of your private business, Your Highness. He demands immediate access to this chamber and all persons present within it. Any delay will be considered an act of defiance against the crown." The weight of those words settled over the room like a death shroud. Defying the king was treason, punishable by death regardless of one's royal bloodline. William watched as the powerful people who had seemed so confident moments before now struggled with the same fear and desperation that he had been feeling. Lord Blackwood and Sir Aldrich exchanged glances that spoke of years of shared secrets and mutual protection. But William could see that their alliance was crumbling under the pressure of real consequences. When survival was at stake, even the strongest bonds of complicity could not be trusted. "What do we do?" Lady Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silence of the chamber. Her question hung in the air unanswered, because everyone present understood that there were no good options remaining. The discovery of their activities by the king himself meant that their carefully constructed world of privilege and corruption was about to collapse. Queen Isabella moved to her son's side, her maternal instincts overriding her royal composure. "Edward, you must let me handle this," she said firmly. "I can perhaps convince your father that I was the primary instigator. As queen, I might be able to negotiate terms that would protect you and preserve the succession." Prince Edward shook his head, his face hardening with a resolve that reminded William why this man was destined to rule. "No, mother. We face this together, or we fall together. I will not purchase my throne with your sacrifice. Despite everything William had witnessed, he found himself feeling a reluctant respect for the prince's courage in this moment. The knocking came again, louder and more insistent. Sir Geoffrey's voice carried a new edge of authority that suggested his patience was exhausted. This is your final warning, Your Highness. Open this door or I will have it broken down with the full authority of the crown. William realized that his own fate hung in the balance of what happened next. If the door opened and the king's representative found him here, he would be assumed to be a participant in whatever activities had taken place. His association with this scandal would be enough to condemn him, regardless of how innocent his original purpose had been. But as William looked around the room at the faces of the kingdom's most powerful people, all of them now reduced to the same fear and desperation that plagued ordinary citizens, he felt something shift inside him. The awe and reverence he had felt for royal authority began to crumble, replaced by a clearer understanding of the difference between power and worth. Prince Edward approached the door, with the resigned dignity of someone who knew that his life was about to change forever. As his hand moved toward the handle, William made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "Wait," William said, his voice stronger than it had been since entering the chamber. "Before you open that door, I want to understand something. All of you have spent the last few minutes trying to convince me that your activities serve some greater good, that the kingdom is better served by allowing you to indulge your desires in secret, rather than holding you to the same standards as ordinary citizens." The adults in the room stared at William with confusion and growing concern. This was not the time for philosophical discussions or moral questioning, but William continued, driven by a clarity of thought that came from having nothing left to lose. If what you do in private doesn't matter, if the kingdom truly benefits from your hidden freedoms, then why are you also afraid of the king discovering your activities? Why does the truth threaten everything you claim to protect? Queen Isabella opened her mouth to respond, but William pressed on before she could speak. "I think the real truth is that you know your behavior is wrong, and you know it would undermine your authority if people understood what you really are. You don't indulge these activities for the good of the kingdom. You do it because you can, because your power protects you from consequences." The silence that followed William's words was broken by another thunderous knock from Sir Geoffrey. Prince Edward's hand tightened on the door handle as he prepared to face whatever judgment awaited them all. But William was not finished. "I was prepared to sign your document and become part of your conspiracy," he said, looking directly at Sir Aldrich. "I was ready to trade my integrity for safety and advancement, but now I understand that there is no safety in complicity. There is only the slow surrender of everything that makes life worth living." As Prince Edward began to turn the handle, William stepped forward and placed his own hand on the door. "Let me open it," he said quietly. "Let me be the first to face whatever consequences come from the truth. If I am going to be condemned for what I have witnessed, let it be as someone who chose honesty over self-preservation." The prince hesitated, studying William's face with new interest. For a moment, the young servant and the future king looked at each other with mutual recognition of the courage they were both about to need. Then Prince Edward stepped aside, allowing William to take hold of the door handle. As William prepared to open the door and face Sir Geoffrey, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. For the first time since entering this chamber of secrets, he knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. Whatever happened next, he would face it with his integrity intact. William turned the handle and pulled the heavy oak door open, revealing Sir Geoffrey standing in the corridor with 4 additional royal guards. The king's advisor was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. His expression remained neutral as he took in the scene before him, but William could sense the sharp intelligence working behind those calm features. "Sir Geoffrey," William said, bowing deeply as he had been taught. "I am William, a servant of the royal household. I was ordered to unlock this chamber and investigate its contents." His voice remained steady despite the hammering of his heart, and he met the older man's gaze directly. Sir Geoffrey stepped into the chamber, his guards remaining in the corridor as instructed. He surveyed the room methodically, taking note of the scattered personal items, the rumpled furnishings, and the obvious signs of recent activity. His eyes lingered on the ornate screen and the documents still scattered across the writing desk. "Your Majesty," Sir Geoffrey said, addressing Queen Isabella with the same formal respect he would show in a public ceremony. "His Majesty the King requests your immediate presence in the throne room, along with Prince Edward and all other individuals currently present in this chamber." The Queen straightened her shoulders and assumed the regal bearing that had served her throughout years of public appearances. "Of course, Sir Geoffrey. We will attend the King immediately." Her voice betrayed none of the fear that William could see in her eyes, and he found himself admiring her composure even as he condemned her actions. Prince Edward stepped forward, drawing Sir Geoffrey's attention away from his mother. "Sir Geoffrey, before we proceed, I want to ensure that this young man," he gestured toward William, "is not held responsible for circumstances beyond his control. He was following orders and had no knowledge of what he might discover." Sir Geoffrey's penetrating gaze shifted to William, studying him with the same intensity he had applied to the room itself. "Is this true, young man? Were you unaware of what activities took place in this chamber?" William felt the weight of everyone's attention focused on him. This was his moment of truth, the point where he would either join the conspiracy of silence or choose a different path entirely. He thought of his parents, simple people who had taught him to value honesty above comfort, and he knew what his answer had to be. "Sir Geoffrey, I was unaware of the specific activities, but I was not blind to the implications of what I discovered. I have seen and heard things that have challenged my understanding of those I serve, and I am prepared to speak truthfully about everything I witnessed." A flicker of something that might have been approval passed across Sir Geoffrey's features. "Very well. You will accompany us to the throne room and provide your testimony to His Majesty directly. Your honesty will be noted and considered in any decisions regarding your future." Lord Blackwood stepped forward, his face pale, but his voice attempting to maintain its usual authority. "Sir Geoffrey, surely there is room for discretion in this matter. The stability of the realm must be considered above all other concerns." Sir Geoffrey turned to face the treasurer with an expression of barely controlled disgust. "Lord Blackwood, your concern for the realm's stability would be more credible if it had prevented you from engaging in activities that directly undermine the moral authority of the crown. His Majesty will determine what serves the kingdom's interests." The rebuke hit Lord Blackwood like a physical blow, and William watched as the man's carefully maintained facade of dignity crumbled. Sir Aldrich moved closer to his longtime ally, but both men now looked like what they truly were: criminals caught in the act of betraying the trust placed in them. Lady Catherine had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now she spoke, in a voice barely above a whisper. "Sir Geoffrey, what will become of our families? Our children have done nothing wrong, yet they will suffer for our mistakes." For the first time since entering the chamber, Sir Geoffrey's expression softened slightly. "My lady, the king is not without mercy, especially toward innocents who bear no responsibility for the choices of others. However, the consequences of actions cannot always be avoided simply because they affect people we care about." William watched this exchange with growing understanding of the complexity of the situation. These were not simply evil people who deserved punishment. They were flawed human beings who had allowed power and privilege to corrupt their judgment. Their actions had been wrong, but their fear for their families was genuine and understandable. As the group prepared to leave the chamber, Sir Geoffrey approached William privately. "Young man, what you do and say in the next few hours will likely determine the course of your entire life. The king values honesty above all other virtues, but he also understands the difficulty of choosing truth over personal safety." William nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Sir Geoffrey, may I ask what led to this discovery? How did the king learn about these activities?" Sir Geoffrey glanced around the chamber one final time before answering. "Someone with intimate knowledge of these gatherings provided detailed information to His Majesty. The identity of that individual will remain confidential, but their courage in coming forward has prevented a corruption that was spreading throughout the highest levels of government." The revelation that someone from within the group had betrayed the others added another layer of complexity to the situation. William wondered who among the participants had found the strength to break their silence, and what had motivated them to risk everything for the sake of truth. As they began to move toward the corridor, Prince Edward fell into step beside William. "Whatever happens next," the prince said quietly, "I want you to know that your courage in speaking honestly has earned my respect. That may not mean much given my current circumstances, but I wanted you to understand that nobility of character is not limited to those born into noble families." William was surprised by the prince's words and the genuine regret he heard in the young man's voice. Despite everything he had witnessed, William found himself hoping that Prince Edward might somehow find a path to redemption, though he knew the road ahead would be difficult for everyone involved. The guards in the corridor formed an escort around the group as they began the long walk to the throne room. Other servants and courtiers they passed looked confused and concerned by the unusual procession, but none dared to ask questions or interfere with Sir Geoffrey's mission. As they walked through the familiar corridors that had been his workplace. For 3 years, William reflected on how much his life had changed in the span of a single morning. He had begun the day as a loyal servant content with his humble position. Now he was walking toward a confrontation with the king himself, carrying knowledge that could reshape the kingdom's future. The throne room lay ahead, and with it, the final chapter of this extraordinary day. William straightened his shoulders and prepared to face whatever judgment awaited him, knowing that he had chosen the path of truth regardless of the cost. The massive doors of the throne room opened with a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the vast chamber. King Henry sat upon his golden throne, his presence commanding even from across the enormous space. At 60 years old, the king still possessed the bearing of a warrior, though silver now streaked his dark hair and lines of responsibility marked his weathered face. William had never been this close to the king before, and he was struck by the intelligence and sadness in the monarch's eyes. This was not a man who took pleasure in what was about to unfold, but rather someone who understood the heavy burden of making decisions that would affect countless lives. The throne room was nearly empty except for a few trusted advisors standing in the shadows along the walls. King Henry had chosen to handle this matter privately, away from the curious eyes and wagging tongues of the full court. The silence in the chamber was oppressive, broken only by the soft footsteps of the group as they approached the throne. Sir Geoffrey gestured for everyone to halt at the appropriate distance from the king, then stepped forward alone. "Your Majesty, I have brought the individuals you requested, along with the young servant who discovered the chamber as instructed." King Henry's gaze moved slowly across each person present, and William felt as though the king could see directly into his soul. When those penetrating eyes finally settled on him, William bowed deeply and remained in that position until given permission to rise. "William," the king said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber despite its conversational tone. "I understand. You have had a most unusual morning. Please tell me in your own words exactly what transpired when you opened the forbidden chamber." William took a deep breath and began to speak, choosing his words carefully, but refusing to soften the truth of what he had witnessed. He described the strange golden light, the evidence of activities that violated both moral standards and the public trust, and the attempted recruitment into their conspiracy of silence. As William spoke, he watched the king's expression grow, increasingly grave. When he finished his account, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before King Henry finally spoke again. "Queen Isabella," the king said, his voice heavy with disappointment and pain. 30 years of marriage, and I believed I knew the woman I wed. How long has this deception been going on?" The queen stepped forward, her regal composure finally cracking under the weight of her husband's direct question. "Henry, you must understand that the pressures of royal life, the constant scrutiny, the endless demands for perfection, they create needs that cannot be satisfied through conventional means." King Henry's expression hardened at his wife's attempt at justification. "Do not insult my intelligence with such explanations, Isabella. You have betrayed not only our marriage vows, but the sacred trust placed in us by our subjects. The people we govern look to us as examples of virtue and moral Authority. Prince Edward stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor William could see in his hands. Father, I take full responsibility for my actions. Whatever punishment you deem appropriate, I will accept without protest. But I beg you to show mercy to those who were drawn into activities by my influence and example. The king studied his son for a long moment before responding. Edward, your willingness to accept responsibility is noted, but it does not excuse the choices made by others, who were old enough and experienced enough to know better. Each person in that chamber made conscious decisions that have brought us to this moment. Lord Blackwood and Sir Aldrich stood together, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Both men seemed to have aged years in the span of hours, understanding that their careers and possibly their lives hung in the balance of the king's judgment. Your Majesty, Lord Blackwood ventured, his voice barely audible. If we might be permitted to resign our positions quietly and retire from court life, perhaps the scandal could be contained without disrupting the kingdom's stability. King Henry's laugh was bitter and devoid of humor. Contain the scandal? My lord, the scandal is not the discovery of your activities. The scandal is that those activities were allowed to continue for so long while you held positions of trust and authority. Lady Catherine finally spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. Your Majesty, what of our children? They are innocent of any wrongdoing, yet they will bear the shame of our actions for the rest of their lives. For the first time since the proceedings began, King Henry's expression softened slightly. My lady, innocent family members will not be punished for crimes they did not commit. However, the natural consequences of your choices cannot be entirely avoided. Actions have results, and those results affect more than just the people who make the decisions. William watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. He was witnessing the collapse of the kingdom's power structure, seeing the most influential people in the realm reduced to pleading for mercy like common criminals. The experience was both educational and deeply disturbing. Sir Geoffrey approached the throne and spoke quietly with the king for several minutes. William could not hear their conversation, but he could see the king nodding thoughtfully as decisions were made about the fate of everyone present. Finally, King Henry addressed the group again. The sentences will be pronounced individually, based on the level of involvement and responsibility of each person. However, before those sentences are announced, I want to address the young man whose honesty has brought this corruption to light. William felt his knees weaken as the king's attention focused entirely on him. This was the moment that would determine his future, and he had no idea what to expect from a monarch whose family he had helped to expose. William, the king continued, you were placed in an impossible situation through no fault of your own. You could have chosen the path of complicity and personal advancement, but instead you chose to speak truthfully despite the personal risks involved. Such integrity is rare and valuable. The king paused, seeming to consider his words carefully before continuing. I am therefore offering you a position in my personal service, with responsibilities that will allow you to use your obvious strength of character in service to the realm. You will be trained in matters of governance and justice, with the possibility of advancement based on your demonstrated abilities. William's mind reeled at this unexpected turn of events. In the span of a single day, he had gone from being a simple servant to being offered a position of influence and responsibility. The irony was not lost on him that his refusal to compromise his principles had led to opportunities that compromising those principles never could have provided. Your Majesty, William said, finding his voice after a moment of stunned silence, I am honored by your offer and accept it with gratitude and humility. I pledge to serve with the same honesty that brought me before you today. King Henry nodded approvingly, then turned his attention back to the others. The sentences he pronounced were severe but just, taking into account both the crimes committed and the personal circumstances of each individual. Some faced exile, others lost their titles and positions, and all were required to make restitution for their betrayal of public trust. As the proceedings concluded, and the throne room began to empty, William realized that his life had been permanently altered by the courage to tell the truth. The boy who had nervously approached a forbidden door that morning was gone, replaced by a young man who understood that integrity was not just a personal virtue but a foundation for just governance. The heavy doors of the throne room closed behind them, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. William's future was uncertain, but it was a future built on the solid ground of his own moral choices rather than the shifting sands of compromise and complicity. Years later, when William had risen to become one of King Henry's most trusted advisors, he would often reflect on that morning when he opened a door slowly and discovered that the greatest treasures and the most dangerous secrets of a kingdom could be found in the same place. The lesson he learned that day, that truth, however difficult, was always preferable to comfortable lies, would guide him throughout his service to the crown and shape the kind of leader he would eventually become.